At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law quietly chuckled. Now that he is no longer here, I am in control of the house, and I am planning to send the elderly woman to a care facility. I smiled to myself. The following week, I sold the house and reserved a spot on a cruise ship. I am grateful you are here with me. Follow my tale until the very end and leave a comment with the city you are watching from so I can know how far my story has traveled. The funeral parlor was heavy with the smell of lilies and sorrow. I stood next to Scott's coffin, my hand placed gently on its smooth wood, trying to grasp the reality that my husband of 45 years was really gone. The stroke had come suddenly without mercy. One moment he was laughing over breakfast, the next he was gone forever. "Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry for your loss," said another face. Another hand squeezed mine. Another well-meaning phrase that somehow could not reach the empty place inside my chest. At 70 years old, I believed I understood loss. I had buried my parents, my sister, and close friends, but losing Scott felt like losing my sense of steadiness itself. Everything that was familiar now seemed alien and uncertain. "Mom, you should take a seat." Stephen, my only son, appeared beside me and guided me toward a chair nearby. His expression showed appropriate sorrow, but there was something missing from his eyes. The deep grief I felt was nowhere to be seen in him. "I am fine standing," I said, but still let him help me sit down. Truthfully, my legs were failing me, just like my heart was recoiling from what I had just overheard. Half an hour earlier, I had stepped into the hallway seeking a brief moment alone when I overheard Stephen and Allison speaking quietly just out of sight. Allison asked in a barely audible voice, "How much longer do you think we should wait?" Stephen seemed preoccupied as he replied, "For what?" She responded with a tone that chilled me, before suggesting she move somewhere more suitable. That house is far too large for her by herself, and it's practically falling apart anyway. Stephen let out a sigh and said he wasn't sure, maybe 1 or 2 months. Then Allison actually laughed, an unsettling sound at my husband's funeral. She said, "Now that he's gone, we can finally update that old kitchen and I know the perfect care facility for her." I stood frozen, unable to move or even breathe. Stephen warned her to be gentle when broaching the topic, because Mom was very attached to her home. Allison replied dismissively, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the old lady. Once she's moved into a home, we can truly make that place look great." I quietly returned to the main room before they noticed me, my heart pounding fiercely. The sense of betrayal burned like acid in my throat. Now, as I sit here surrounded by mourners flowing around me like a river around a rock, I see Allison approaching with a carefully crafted expression of sympathy. She crouches before me, taking my hands warmly and asks, "Carolyn, is there anything you need? Anything at all?" Her eyes, typically sharp and judgmental, now seem softer and more tender. I observed this woman, my son's spouse for 15 years, with a practiced expression of concern, and I wondered how I had failed to see the intention behind her kindness. Had she been quietly waiting all this time? Waiting for Scott to pass away so she could step in, take over our home and our memories, while discarding me as if I were no longer relevant? I whispered that I was simply exhausted. She responded softly, "Of course you are, poor thing," while gently stroking my hand. "Do not worry about a thing. Stephen and I will handle everything." I believed she would, but I only managed a feeble smile. The house that Allison so ardently desired had been the result of our shared efforts. Scott and I had bought it as a young couple when the area was still emerging. We had painted every single room ourselves, nurtured our garden side by side, and raised our son within those walls. Scott had constructed the back deck with his own hands, swearing at the splinters in the summer heat. Every detail held a fragment of our story, yet they were eager to remake the kitchen. Visitors came and went with somber expressions and hollow words. I felt something change inside me. The overwhelming sorrow was still present, but alongside it, an unforeseen, slow-burning anger began to rise, making me stand taller. Later that evening, after the last neighbor who had brought food had left, I found myself alone in Scott's study. His glasses were still on the desk, exactly where he had placed them. His favorite sweater hung on the chair. For a moment, the heaviness of his absence threatened to engulf me, but then I found. My gaze landed on a framed picture of the two of us celebrating our 40th anniversary. Scott had his arm around me, and we were both laughing on the deck of a cruise ship, our one major indulgence. He had promised we would take another trip for our 50th. I whispered to the empty room, "What would you do, Scott?" A vivid memory came back to me as clearly as if it were yesterday. Scott had confronted a contractor who tried to deceive us years ago. "Never let anyone confuse your kindness for weakness, Carolyn," he told me afterward. "Sometimes you have to show your teeth." I traced my fingers over the cruise ship photo as a plan took shape in my mind. Allison assumed I was just a frail, elderly woman. Stephen appeared to have forgotten whose son he was. They expected me to break down and be quietly pushed aside while they claimed what Scott and I had built together. They had no clue who they were really dealing with. I lifted the phone and called my longtime friend Margaret, who had retired from real estate only the previous year. "Maggie, it's Carolyn. I know it's late, but I need your help with something very important." When I ended the call, I was smiling even though tears were streaming down my face. They wanted my home. Let them come and try. 3 days after we laid Scott to rest, I found myself facing Ted Holloway, our family lawyer for the past 30 years. His office looked almost the same. The familiar leather chairs, the discreet box of tissues for bereaved clients, and the kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses. "First, Carolyn, please let me express again how deeply sorry I am about Scott," Ted said, his voice carrying sincere sympathy. Sympathy filled the room. He was a good man. "The best," I agreed, my throat tightening. Ted nodded and then switched to the professional tone I needed at that moment. "I have brought Scott's will as you requested. It is straightforward, as you know. Scott left everything to you. The house, investments, insurance policies, everything. I knew this, of course. Scott and I shared everything honestly, but hearing it confirmed gave me an unexpected sense of relief. "Is there anything specific you are worried about?" Ted asked, studying my expression closely. I hesitated but chose honesty. "Stephen and Allison," I said quietly. "I overheard them at the funeral. They are planning to move me into an assisted living facility. Soon." Ted raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Is that against your wishes?" "They haven't asked me what I want," bitterness creeping into my voice. "Allison called me the old lady already. They are even planning renovations to my kitchen." Ted's expression darkened. "They have no legal right to make those decisions for you, Carolyn. The house is yours outright." "I know that, but I also understand how these things usually unfold." I leaned forward. "They will start with little things, comments about the house being too much work for me, doubts about me living alone. Then brochures will appear, visits to facilities will be arranged. They will wear me down until I reluctantly agree." "And you want to avoid that?" "Yes." My voice gained strength. "I am completely capable of living on my own, and I neither need nor want their assistance." Ted nodded and then glanced at the door to make sure it was closed. "What exactly are you planning?" "Carolyn?" I squared my shoulders. "I intend to sell the house quickly, quietly, and without Stephen and Allison knowing until everything is settled." Ted did not seem shocked. "Then I will purchase something smaller, something I can handle on my own. And I will take that cruise Scott and I always dreamed about for our 50th anniversary." Saying it out loud made it feel more real. Ted gave a slight smile. "Sounds like you have really considered this carefully. I've certainly had plenty of time to think over the last few days." He took out a legal pad. "We will need to act swiftly. The market is favorable at the moment. Houses in your area are moving fast. I can suggest a few discreet realtors. I have already contacted Margaret Wilson. She is coming out of retirement to help with this." Ted laughed softly. "Of course you did." Scott always said you were always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Hearing Scott's name stirred a new wave of sorrow in me, mixed with resolve. I will not allow Allison and Stephen to erase his presence in our home, convert his workshop into a home gym, or replace his lovingly tended garden with the latest trendy landscaping Allison might want this year. There is something else, I said, taking a small notebook from my purse. I need your advice on how to keep track of their behavior. For the next hour, Ted and I mapped out my plan. I would act the part they expected, the grieving widow who feels a bit lost, slowly accepting their assistance. Meanwhile, I would record every detail carefully. Every conversation, every suggestion about care facilities, every comment about the house was not intended for legal reasons, but for my own sense of calm. When the time arrived to disclose what I had done, I wanted a clear understanding behind my actions. As I exited Ted's office, my phone vibrated with a message from Stephen. He was coming over that night with dinner, and Allison had found some brochures she thought I should check out. Already beginning, I thought, just as expected. That evening, I opened the door wearing my bathrobe, hair messy, eyes purposely swollen. The perfect image of a woman barely managing to keep it together. "Mum," Stephen said as he hugged me awkwardly, "how are you coping?" "I am managing," I replied, allowing my voice to falter slightly. Allison rushed past us straight to the kitchen carrying a bag of takeout. "The place is a disaster, Carolyn," she shouted over her shoulder. "We should hire someone to help keep things in order." The house was immaculate. I had been cleaning obsessively to distract myself, but I just gave a faint nod. "Maybe you're right." During dinner, they exchanged explaining looks before Allison took a glossy brochure from her purse. "We found this fantastic community, Carolyn. It is designed for active seniors like you. They offer social gatherings, transportation options, even a swimming pool." I accepted the brochure with trembling hands, not from emotion, but from the effort to stop myself from throwing it back at her. "Sunset Gardens," I read aloud. "It sounds more like a resort than a—" "The retirement home," Allison continued, "shines brightly. They offer various degrees of care, so if you ever require extra support, they take care of everything," Stephen added. "Meals, cleaning, medical attention, you would no longer need to be concerned about maintaining such a large property." I nodded slowly as tears began to fill my eyes. This house holds so many memories. Allison gently squeezed my hand. "Of course, but Scott would not want you to struggle here all alone." "Don't even think of speaking for him," I thought. Yet I said, "You are probably right. I just need some time." "Naturally," Stephen responded quickly. "There is no hurry. Just something to consider." While they cleared away the dinner plates, I overheard Allison whisper, "See, she's already starting to come around." After they had left, I took the brochure to Scott's study and placed it inside a new folder labeled Evidence. Then I called Margaret immediately. "How quickly can we put the house on the market?" I asked without any introduction. "I can have a photographer come by tomorrow. The listing will be ready by the weekend," she answered. "Are you really certain about this, Carolyn?" I glanced around the home that Scott and I had created together. Yes, it held cherished memories, but those memories live within my heart, not these walls. "Absolutely certain," I said. "And Margaret, this must stay between us. Not a word to Stephen or Allison. My lips are sealed," she assured me. "Now tell me what kind of home you want," she urged. As I described my criteria, single-level, manageable yard, strong security, I felt lighter than I had since Scott passed away. For the first time, I was not just coping with loss meant taking command of what was left. My existence, my destiny, my self-respect. Let them assume I was a powerless elderly woman. Their misjudgment would become my greatest strength. 2 weeks passed in a haze of thoughtful choices and clandestine gatherings. I honed the skill of seeming delicate while orchestrating enormous changes behind the scenes. Whenever Stephen or Allison stopped by unexpectedly, which grew more often, I would be seated with a photo album, wiping away tears, or gazing blankly out the window. "I have been reflecting on what you mentioned," I told them during one such visit, my tone intentionally soft. "Perhaps Sunset Gardens might be a simpler option." The look of victory that crossed Allison's face almost made the charade worthwhile. She immediately said, "We could visit this weekend," barely masking her enthusiasm. "Maybe next week," I replied. "I am still going through some of Scott's belongings." Meanwhile, Margaret had worked wonders. 3 serious prospective buyers toured the house while I conveniently visited old friends. The for sale sign stayed buried in Margaret's trunk, never touching my lawn. Everything proceeded through private viewings and hushed deals. "The Hendersons have made an offer," Margaret announced one Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen holding a contract. "Full asking price, cash offer, closing in 30 days. They are a wonderful young couple with 2 small children." I felt a sudden pang hit me as I pictured tiny new feet running through the hallways where Stephen used to play. Yet this felt right. This home deserved a family, not Addison's cold, impersonal renovations. Margaret gently remarked that they wanted to preserve the garden, sensing how much that meant to me. The husband had mentioned that Scott's rose bushes had sealed the deal for him. Tears welled in my eyes, genuine ones this time. Scott would appreciate that. I signed the papers that afternoon. As I passed back the pen, Margaret gave my hand a warm squeeze and said, "Scott would be proud of you, Carolyn." That very day, I placed an offer on a charming little cottage in Oakridge, a quaint neighborhood about 20 minutes away. It boasted 2 bedrooms, a sunroom perfect for my plants, and a small, manageable garden. Most importantly, it came with a security system and a neighborhood patrol. I was not foolish about how Addison might respond. My final gesture was the most indulgent. I booked a 3-week cruise across the Mediterranean, departing just after closing. A first-class balcony cabin with all the excursions Scott and I had dreamed about. Though the expense made me worried, Ted had carefully reviewed our finances. I could afford it. "Mum, we've scheduled a tour at Sunset Gardens for Saturday," Stephen announced over the phone on Wednesday. The director was making special time for us. "That's wonderful, dear," I replied, my voice filled with reluctant acceptance. "I suppose it's time." By Friday, everything was set. The house sale was set to close in 28 days. My purchase of the cottage was moving ahead without a hitch, and my cruise plans were securing my escape. Everything was set. I had arranged for the movers to arrive the day following the closing. The only thing left was to set the plan in motion. I invited Stephen and Allison to join me for brunch on Saturday, suggesting we could visit Sunset Gardens afterward. Allison, clearly thrilled by her success, offered to bring pastries from that fancy bakery downtown. On Saturday morning, I dressed with extra care, not my usual relaxed pants and blouse, but a chic dress I had bought especially for this moment. I put on makeup, styled my hair, and even wore the pearl necklace Scott gave me on our 40th anniversary. I did not look like someone preparing for a retirement facility. I looked like a woman embracing a fresh start. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Allison hurried inside first, carefully carrying a pink pastry box. "Wow, Mum, you look great," Stephen said, clearly impressed. "Thank you, dear. I wanted to make an effort today." Allison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, isn't that charming? You might want to change before the tour. Something more comfortable." "I believe this will be just fine," I answered with a smile. "Shall we have some coffee?" We gathered around the dining room table, the place where our family had shared countless meals over the years. Allison immediately began detailing the amenities at Sunset Gardens. "The activities director organizes bridge tournaments every Thursday," she exclaimed with enthusiasm. "They even have a van that takes residents shopping twice a week." "You will not have to drive at all," I said, pouring myself some coffee, "and I assume you have already arranged the financial details." Stephen shifted uneasily in his seat. "Well, we thought the house would more than cover the expenses." "The house," I repeated, setting down the coffee pot carefully. You mean my house? Well, yes, Allison said, her voice implying I was intentionally slow to understand. Once you sell it, I interrupted calmly and clearly, I have already sold it. The silence that followed was complete. Stephen's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Allison's face remained frozen, displaying pure shock. You what? Stephen finally found his voice. I sold the house, I restated, pulling the closing papers from a folder beside me. The sale finalizes in 27 days. The new owners are a wonderful young family with 2 children. Allison's cheeks turned a deep shade of red. You cannot be serious. You cannot just go ahead without discussing it with us, without consulting me about my house. I lifted an eyebrow. The house that is solely in my name, the house you have been planning to renovate since before Scott was even laid to rest. Stephen paled. Mom, what are you talking about? Oh, I believe you know exactly, I said, directing my gaze at him. I heard both of you at the funeral, plotting to place the old lady in a home and take over the house. Stephen's eyes flicked nervously to Allison, who now gripped her coffee cup so tightly, I worried it might break. Mom, you misunderstood, Stephen started. Did I? I asked sharply. I reached for another folder and pulled out my small notebook. April 12th, Allison suggested I might not be able to handle the stairs much longer. April 15th, you both invited a realtor friend who happened to mention the possible value of the house. April 18th, the first Sunset Gardens brochure arrived, along with remarks about the kitchen being terribly outdated. I glanced up from my notes. Shall I keep going? You have been keeping track of us? Allison's voice sharpened. I have been protecting myself, I responded. Now please excuse me, I have packing to do. Packing for what? Stephen demanded. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For my cruise, of course, the Mediterranean. 3 weeks in a first-class cabin. It departs the day after closing. For the first time in our relationship, Allison seemed completely speechless. You cannot do this. Her tone lost its usual sweetness and became hard and brittle. You are clearly not thinking rationally. You are grieving and making reckless decisions. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years, I answered, calmly folding my hands on the table. Grief can cut through the haze and reveal what really matters. Stephen looked stunned, his face pale. Mom, where will you live? I have bought a charming cottage in Oak Ridge. 2 bedrooms, all on 1 floor, much easier to manage. I took a sip of coffee. The significance of the security system was not missed. Addison's nostrils flared as she responded, You are being unreasonable. We were only trying to help by referring to me as the old lady, and by planning to renovate my house while I'm staying in some facility. I shook my head firmly. That is not help, Addison. What you are doing is taking advantage. Stephen pushed away from the table, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Mom, you are misunderstanding everything. We were worried about you living alone. Then you should have asked what I wanted, I interrupted, my tone sharper now, not made decisions behind my back. Suddenly, Addison stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. I do not have to listen to this. You are being completely unreasonable. Sit down, Addison. Unexpectedly, it was Stephen who spoke this time. His voice was strained but resolute. Mom deserves to know the truth. Addison stared at him, unaccustomed to anyone opposing her. After a brief pause, she reluctantly sat back down, crossing her arms defensively. I heard everything, I said quietly, looking straight at my son. At the funeral, you both assumed I could not hear, but I did. Every single word. Stephen's eyes fell to the table, unable to meet mine. I gave you every chance to be honest with me, every time you mentioned Sunset Gardens, and whenever Addison complained about how hard it must be for me in this house, I waited for you to show some real concern. My voice stayed calm, even as my heart pounded. But it was always about the house, never about me. That is not true, Stephen insisted. Stephen expressed hesitation as he spoke quietly. Isn't it true? When was the last occasion you genuinely inquired about my well-being? When did you last sit down and discuss your father with me? About the sorrow that overwhelms me? Tears threatened to fall, but I blinked them away. Since the funeral, you have come by 8 times, yet never once have you asked about me. Your questions always focused on the house, my living arrangements, or what might be best for me. Stephen's expression softened, showing the first real emotion since Scott passed away. We are family, he said with a hollow tone. That means we care for one another. Family does not plot, family does not deceive. I shook my head with sadness. Your father would be deeply disappointed. Stephen recoiled as if struck. Scott had been his idol, his guiding moral force. Realizing he had let Scott down seemed to finally sink in. Allison, on the other hand, remained unaffected. This is ridiculous. You are punishing us because we tried to support you. You have your plans for the future. No, Allison, I replied firmly. I am protecting myself from what you call help. I stood up, signaling the end of our discussion. Now, I truly need to finish packing. Allison protested in surprise. You cannot just throw us out. Actually, I can, I said. This house is mine for at least the next 27 days. I moved toward the front door, holding it open. I will share my new address once I am settled. Or perhaps I will not. Stephen rose unsteadily and looked torn. Mom, please. Stephen, I need time. Time to decide what I must do. I softened my voice slightly and said, They can trust you again. Your father always believed you had a kind heart, but he also said you needed to discover your own strength. I hope he was right. They left with Stephen looking heartbroken, Allison filled with anger, and I quietly closed the door behind them with a soft click. Only then did I let myself collapse onto the bench in the entryway, my hands trembling. I had done it. After years of being the peacemaker and the one who always gave in, I finally stood up for myself. The wave of relief was overwhelming. The response was quick and exactly what I expected. Within an hour, my phone began ringing. First Stephen, then Allison, followed by some of their friends and even my sister-in-law, Carolyn. I chose to let all of them go to voicemail. The messages were a mix. Stephen's full of regret, Allison's filled with threats, and the others confused and unsure. Apparently, Allison was spreading rumors that I had some kind of breakdown and that I was making dangerous, irrational choices because of my grief. It might have been believable if I had not been so calm and methodical. Later that evening, Ted called, laughing. He said Allison had shown up at my office that afternoon. He told me, demanding to know if I was truly capable of handling the house sale despite everything. I laughed and asked, "What did you say to her?" Ted replied, "That you are one of the most capable people I have ever met, whether grieving or not, and that if she kept spreading lies, she could end up sued for defamation." I thanked Ted. "My pleasure," he said. "How are you holding up?" I thought for a moment, glancing around the living room, trying to find the words. I was in the middle of sorting and packing when I finally admitted I felt sad. Not about the house, but about Stephen. I had never truly understood how much Allison controlled him until now. He is a grown man, Carolyn. He made his own decisions. I know that. I sighed deeply. Still, he is my son. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I hired professionals to help with packing, gave away furniture that would not fit into my smaller cottage, and carefully went through the cherished keepsakes accumulated over a lifetime. Margaret visited often, bringing lunch and helping me decide what to keep. About a week after our disagreement, Stephen showed up alone at my doorstep. He looked terrible, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that looked wrinkled. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I hesitated but then stepped aside. He walked inside to the half-packed living room, seeming lost among the many boxes. "You are really going through with this?" I asked. He nodded slowly before turning to face me. "Allison and I had a huge fight. I have been staying at Dave's place," he said. I stayed silent, waiting for him to go on. You were right. He finally admitted about everything. I was not considering what you wanted. I let Allison convince me we knew better. He swallowed hard. I have been a terrible son. I shook my head gently. Not terrible, I said softly, just misguided. Can you forgive me? I studied his face, so much like Scott's, yet lacking his inner strength. Forgiveness takes time, Stephen, and rebuilding trust takes even longer. He nodded, looking down. I understand. I just do not want to lose you as well. For the first time since Scott passed away, I noticed my true son beginning to emerge from Allison's shadow. It was not enough yet, but it marked a beginning. Your father once told me, the real measure of a man is not whether he makes mistakes. I replied, it is whether he finds the bravery to admit them and change. Stephen's eyes welled up with tears. I miss him deeply. So do I. I reached out and gently touched his arm, every single day. We shared a moment of silence, bound together by sorrow if nothing else. When do you leave for your cruise? He finally asked. 3 weeks from Tuesday. He nodded and glanced around the half-packed house. Need any help with all this? I thought for a moment, then nodded. I could use some assistance with your father's workshop. I've been putting it off. I can handle that, he said, a spark of the old Stephen shining through. Dad would want his tools used, not stored away. As he rolled up his sleeves and headed to the garage, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. Allison, however, was not done with me yet. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly before me, an immense sea of blue, seemingly erasing the lingering shadows from the past weeks. Standing on the deck of the Royal Princess, I closed my eyes and let the sea breeze gently touch my face. For the first time since Scott's death, I sensed a feeling close to peace. Beautiful, is it not? I turned to find Eleanor, a woman with silver hair I had met during dinner the night before, joined me at the railing. Like myself, she was traveling alone, a widow for 3 years who had finally chosen to take the journey her husband had always promised. It's beyond what I expected, I confessed. Scott and I had discussed this cruise for many years, always delaying it, thinking we had all the time in the world. Eleanor gave a knowing nod, a trace of understanding in her eyes. That is the cruelest trick life plays, the illusion that there will always be endless tomorrows. The first week on the cruise flew by in a haze of port excursions, refined dinners, and laughter that came without warning. I became part of an informal group of solo travelers, including Eleanor, a retired professor named Jack, a former nurse called Diane, and Richard, a gentle widower with compassionate eyes. None of us were seeking romance, only company. We settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals and exploring on shore. On the 8th day, while we sailed to Santorini, I finally checked my phone messages. The physical and emotional distance had given me the courage to confront what awaited me. Stephen had called multiple times. His voice messages had shifted, becoming more thoughtful and less defensive. I have been reflecting on what you said, Mom, he expressed in the latest message, about Dad's disappointment in me. You were right. I have allowed Allison to make too many choices and tried too hard to avoid conflict at all costs. I am seeing a counselor now, trying to understand how. I felt completely lost. Tears unexpectedly welled up in my eyes. Perhaps there was still hope for my son after all. Allison had sent several messages as well, each one more spiteful than the previous. The last message caused me to stop and reflect. You think you're so smart, Carolyn, but you have ruined this family. Stephen barely speaks to me anymore. I hope your revenge brings you satisfaction. I deleted her messages without replying. This was not about revenge. It was about staying alive. The evening before we arrived in Santorini, I joined my new friends for dinner. The conversation was easy and natural until Diane asked a question I had been trying to avoid. Will your family be waiting for you when we return to the United States? I hesitated but chose to be honest. These people had unexpectedly become trusted friends, as we shared stories of family struggles over wine and late-night talks. "No," I admitted, "my son and I have a complicated relationship right now." My daughter-in-law had even tried to have me declared incompetent after I sold my house instead of letting her take control. Their faces changed from surprise to anger as I told the whole story. Jack said firmly, "You did exactly what was right. Too many elderly people get pushed around by family members who think they know best." Elena reached out and squeezed my hand gently. "It takes bravery to set limits, especially with your own child." "That is exactly what worries me," I confessed. "I do not want to lose Stephen, but I cannot return to how things were before." Richard, who seldom spoke at length, cleared his throat. "After my Sarah passed away, my daughter tried to move me into her basement, saying it was for my own benefit." His gaze met mine with quiet comprehension. "Rebuilding our relationship took me a full year after I refused, but it proved worthwhile. Now she respects me in a way she never had before." His words lingered with me as I watched the sunset from my balcony that evening. Maybe Stephen and I needed exactly that, a connection grounded in mutual respect instead of obligation. I was surprised to find myself eagerly anticipating returning home, not to the house. That chapter had ended, but to my new cottage, my fresh start. The cruise had been everything Scott and I had hoped for, yet it revealed something unexpected as well. I could build a life without him. Different, definitely painful in its voids, yet also filled with opportunity. The day before we docked in Athens, I received an email from Margaret containing pictures of my cottage. The previous owners had left it spotless, and the movers had arranged my belongings exactly as per the floor plan we had designed. It looked inviting, serene, a perfect retreat. Included was a separate note. "Thought you should know Alison came by the office yesterday seeking your new address. I told her client details are confidential. She was not pleased, just wanted to give you a heads up." I was not surprised. Alison had always had trouble respecting boundaries. Losing control of the situation would be unbearable for her. I made a mental note to ensure the security system was active before I made any moves. On our final night at sea, the 5 of us came together for a farewell dinner. We exchanged contact details and promises to meet again, maybe for another voyage. I glanced around the table at these individuals who had entered my life only weeks ago, yet already felt like lifelong friends. "A toast," Scott suggested, lifting his glass. "To fresh starts. And to those not here to experience them," Carolyn added quietly. "But who would be proud of the paths we are taking without them?" I thought of Scott, his laughter, his steady support, the way he had always urged me to stand strong. "To Scott," I murmured, raising my glass with the others. My plane landed in Athens early in the afternoon. Despite my worries, no one awaited me at the airport, neither Stephen nor Alison. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Part of me had hoped Stephen would be there, as a sign of making peace. Margaret greeted me at the arrival gate with a familiar smile, a comforting sight. "Welcome home, traveller," she said warmly, hugging me. "You look wonderful, refreshed. The Mediterranean suits you." "It truly did," I replied as we gathered my baggage. "Stephen called you," Margaret mentioned as we walked toward her car. 3 times even. "He wanted to know when you would be back." I raised an eyebrow. "And did you tell him?" "I was surprised to hear you would be returning this week. I thought you should choose when to meet him." She looked at me intently. His voice sounded different, more like the Stephen I used to know before Alison. I nodded slowly, trying to take it all in. "And Alison?" Margaret's face darkened slightly. There was no contact after that day in my office, but she sighed softly. "Rumor has it Stephen is now living permanently with his friend Dave. Apparently, there was quite an incident at their home. Neighbors even called the police." I closed my eyes for a moment. Despite everything, I did not take any joy in my son's relationship struggles. I decided I would call him tomorrow. After settling in, the drive to Oakage took us along tree-lined streets where early autumn was just beginning to tint the leaves golden. When we turned onto Willow Lane, I felt a sudden excitement, Margaret said, as she pulled into the driveway of a quaint cottage with a small front yard. Here it is, home sweet home. I got out of the car and noticed every detail. The blue shutters, the stone walkway, the rose bushes along the front. This was not the house that Scott and I once shared, yet it felt right in its own way. It seemed like the perfect place to cherish the past while looking forward to what lay ahead. It is wonderful, I said sincerely. Inside, everything matched the pictures exactly. My favorite reading chair is in the sunroom surrounded by my plants. Scott's desk may be smaller than the one in his study, but still holds the same meaning. In a corner of the living room rested his presents. Our wedding photograph had the place of honor on the mantelpiece. While Allison assisted me in unpacking my suitcase, I felt an increasing assurance that I had made the right decision. This space was mine, manageable, inviting, free from hurtful recollections and manipulations. That evening, I experienced restful sleep for the first time in many months, comforted by the unfamiliar creaks and the gentle sounds of my new home settling. Tomorrow would bring its own difficulties, like reconnecting with Stephen, creating new habits, and discovering my place within this community. Yet at that moment, I was exactly where I ought to be. 1 year following Scott's passing, I stood in my sunroom watering the orchids that had turned into my peaceful obsession. Through the glass, I watched my little garden awaken with spring blossoms. Daffodils pushed their way through the earth, and the rose bushes began to bud with hope. Some of these plants were cuttings from Scott's garden, replanted here, thriving in a fresh chapter of life. The doorbell chimed and I smiled warmly. Right on schedule, I called as I set down my watering can. Stephen appeared on the porch holding a small gift bag. The year behind us had transformed him. His stance was more upright, his gaze sharper, and his smile sincere. The influence of Addison's shadow had diminished, revealing the sun I had always known beneath. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, embracing me. "Thank you, darling," I replied, leading him inside. "You are the first to arrive. Margaret and the others should arrive soon." He followed me into the kitchen, where a cake rested on the counter. Chocolate with vanilla frosting. Scott's favorite recipe that I had finally perfected after many years of trying. Some customs were definitely worth preserving. "How is the new apartment?" I asked, while pouring coffee for both of us. "Good, small but near work," he replied with a shrug. The divorce would be finalized next month. I agreed quietly, still feeling sorrow over the end of his marriage, but also relieved that he had broken free from Allison's control. The split had been harsh. Accusations, threats, and even a restraining order after she showed up unannounced at his workplace and caused a scene. Yet Stephen stayed strong. Supported by the counselor, he continued to see every week. "And what about the job?" I asked again, noticing his expression brighten. "Actually, it's going really well. They are thinking about promoting me to project manager." I grinned, genuinely proud. After years of drifting aimlessly between half-hearted careers under Allison's influence, Stephen had returned to his first passion, architectural restoration. That confidence suited him perfectly. "Dad would have been proud," I whispered. Stephen's eyes grew moist. "I often wonder what he would think of the changes I've made. He always believed in you, even when you doubted yourself." He nodded and then took the gift bag. "This is for you. It's simple, but inside is a small wooden box, beautifully designed with a delicate pattern of birds in flight." Stephen said, I created something beautiful," he confessed, a trace of pride evident in his voice. "In that woodworking class I mentioned, Dad's tools helped me practice." I ran my hand over the smooth finish, touched by emotions beyond expression. Scott had spent years trying to engage Stephen in woodworking, but Allison always dismissed it as a foolish pursuit. "It is perfect," I said. "Thank you." The doorbell rang once more, and soon the cottage was alive with voices and laughter as my new group of friends arrived. Margaret, Eleanor, and Jack from the cruise, who had eventually become more than just friends, neighbours from Willow Lane, and fellow members of my book club. As we gathered around the dining table, I looked at the faces around me. Some new, some familiar, all treasured. A year ago, this moment was unimaginable. I had been defined by the loss of Scott, the home we once shared, and the bond I believed I had with my son. Yet now, although not a day passes without missing Scott, I have created something new from the ruins of that sorrow. It is not a replacement, but a continuation, a life still filled with meaning. After cake and gifts, as conversations splintered into smaller groups, Stephen pulled me aside. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, his face serious. "Is it important? Alison contacted me yesterday." My stomach clenched. "What did she want?" I asked. He shook his head, incredulous. She claimed she had been reflecting on everything. She returned to work and suddenly realized how controlling she had been. "Do you believe her?" "Not even for a moment." His tone was steady. Yet that was not the part that worried me most. She inquired specifically about you, your address even. Claimed she wanted to make things right. A shiver ran down my spine despite the mild spring daylight. "What did you say to her?" "Nothing at all. But Mum, she described your cottage, the blue shutters, the roses. I have a feeling she already knows exactly where you live." I slowly nodded, not really shocked. Alison's perseverance had always been her strongest trait. "Thank you for telling me. I will be cautious." Stephen's forehead creased with concern. "Perhaps I should stay here a few days." "No." I stopped him softly. "I appreciate that, but I can manage Alison on my own. Mum, I have a security system, observant neighbours who keep watch, and Margaret ready to call at any moment." I clasped his hand assuringly. "Trust me, Stephen, she no longer frightens me." He looked at me carefully, then gave a reluctant nod. "Just reach out to me if anything happens, no matter what." "I promise." The celebration went on until early evening, filling my home with a comforting warmth and joyful sounds that soothed the soul. When the final guest left, Stephen helped tidy up, then hesitated at the threshold. "Are you really going to be okay?" I smiled, moved by his care. "Absolutely sure. Now go, you have that important presentation tomorrow." After he was gone, I moved through the house, switching off lamps and locking the windows under the bright sunlight. In the room, I paused to admire the orchids Scott had never succeeded in keeping alive. I whispered softly to his memory, "Look at that. I finally figured it out." The next morning was clear and sunny. While enjoying my coffee in the garden, the sound of tires crunching on gravel signaled an unexpected guest. Looking up, a wave of recognition hit me as Alison's sleek car rolled into the driveway. Some things never change, I thought, setting my cup down and straightening up. She stepped out of the vehicle looking thinner than I remembered, her usual flawless appearance somewhat worn. Divorce had not been kind to her. "Carolyn," she said, approaching with a forced cheerfulness, "what a beautiful home you have here." I stayed seated, choosing not to stand. "Alison, this is not what I expected." She paused at the garden's edge, clearly unsettled by my indifferent reception. "I have been doing a lot of thinking," she started, her prepared words feeling empty. "About how things ended between us. I am sorry." "Were you?" I asked coolly. "Or did you want something else?" Her smile wavered. "I do not know what you mean." "I think you do," I said, motioning to the chair opposite me. "But please sit down. Tell me what you came here to say." She lowered herself carefully, eyes flickering across the garden as if measuring its worth. "Stephen and I are divorcing." "I am aware it has been hard financially," I replied. She nervously twisted her hands in her lap. "The house is going into foreclosure," I thought quietly to myself. "Given your own experience of nearly losing your home, you might understand." I raised a hand to stop her and said, "Let me save us both some time, Alison. You are not here to say sorry. You came because you need money, and you think I might be manipulated or guilted into giving it." Her expression hardened as any sign of remorse disappeared. "You ruined my marriage. You owe me." I laughed, genuinely entertained by her boldness. "I owe you nothing. You schemed to put me in a care facility and take my house. You called me the old lady at my late husband's funeral. You tried to have me declared incompetent when I outsmarted you. I never stop lying, Allison. It is exhausting for both of us." For a moment, raw anger crossed her face, revealing the true Allison beneath the facade. Then she collected herself, leaning forward with measured focus. "Fine, I need help, Carolyn. I am not too proud to ask. But you are too proud to earn it honestly." I shook my head firmly. "The answer is no." She stared at me, as if unable to accept this final refusal. "You are heartless," she whispered. "You think you have won, do you?" I glanced around my tranquil garden, thought of my cozy home, the friends who had celebrated with me just yesterday, the son who was slowly finding his way back to himself. I thought of Scott, who would have been so proud of the strength I had discovered. This was never about winning Allison. I stood, indicating our conversation was over. It was about much more than that. Surviving is something I have grown quite skilled at. "This is not over," she hissed, standing up steadily. "Actually, it is," I replied, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Goodbye, Allison. I truly wish you well, but our paths end here." I watched as she drove off, her tires throwing gravel in anger. Maybe in the past, such a confrontation would have left me trembling, doubting myself, but not anymore. Inside, I called Stephen. "Allison came to see me," I told him as he answered. "I thought you should know." "I'm coming over," he said without delay. "There is no need. She is gone and will not return," I assured him. "How can you be so certain?" he asked. I smiled, though he could not see it. "Because I am not the woman she believed I was, and I am not the woman I once believed myself to be." After we ended the call, I returned to the garden, where the roses Scott and I had cared for over many years were planted. They were smaller here, still settling into fresh soil, but they thrived, adapting and growing stronger every day, just like me. The warm afternoon sun touched my face as I closed my eyes, sensing Scott's presence in the soft breeze. "We did it," I whispered. "We made it through the hardest times." Somewhere within the rustling leaves and the far-off songs of birds, I thought I heard his voice answering. "I never doubted you for a single moment, Carolyn. Not one moment. Now I am curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever faced something like this? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, I'm about to leave on the next chapter of my journey. The final screen features 2 additional tales that have become favorites on the channel and are sure to astonish you. We truly appreciate you staying with us until the end.